The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
So you remember when Dan Snyder wished everybody a happy Thanksgiving on the 2nd of January and said that his operation was going to be run coach-centric and Coach Ron Rivera would be in charge of everything? Seemed to make sense because, well, Danny wasn't involved. Well, here we are 4 years later, and wow, you look at what's left of the roster, you look at what's left of the Ron Rivera draft picks, you'd have to say, top to bottom, coach-centric was a complete disaster. And while you had Dan Quinn saying it's not a rebuild, it's a recalibrate, oh boy, this was a complete teardown. And we'll see what they have going forward. But there ain't much left of the Ron Rivera era in Ashburn. We'll get to more on that coming up. Matthew Berry, the fantasy football guy, was on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday. He's got Who You Should Draft #1 and an interesting take on what they call the Guillotine League. This is not something I was familiar with, but he owns it, the Guillotine League. And we'll get to that later this hour. Jordan Palmer, who was once drafted by the Redskins in 2007, sixth-round pick out of UTEP. His brother Carson Palmer taken number one, and might have been a Hall of Fame quarterback had he not suffered so many injuries. But Jordan, not as good, didn't last very long in the NFL as a player, but he has transitioned into being one of these quarterback gurus. So is John Beck, who was absolutely abysmal as a quarterback in the NFL, including here. But these guys, it's like if you can't do, you teach, and these guys, I guess, are doing that now. But Jordan Palmer, who works with a lot of different quarterbacks, says that the ceiling for Caleb Williams may be higher than Patrick Mahomes, and the entree into the NFL for Caleb Williams is a lot better than it was for Patrick Mahomes. So we'll get to that in the 10 o'clock hour as well. A little baseball to start with here, and we'll get to that in just a moment about what Dylan Cruz did. But just to put a little bow for now on the whole draft thing and what they did, the Commanders yesterday, and getting the roster down to 53. Once again, and this will be the all-time clip and save, from his opening news conference when Adam Peters was introduced as the new general manager of the team. They haven't had many general managers over the years. Scott McLuhan lasted 2 years until Bruce Allen said, get out. But Peters said this in response to a question from David Aldridge of The Athletic.
I wonder what you think of the current roster.
I believe that there's a few cornerstone pieces in this roster. I believe we have a lot of work to do, and that's just evaluating everybody. And that's going to start with the coaches. When the coaches come in, we hire a head coach. We sit down together with the personnel department, and we sit down and evaluate everything and figure out where we need to be. So that's an ongoing process. I've started a little bit, but we have a lot of work to do, Dave.
Yeah, and 8 months plus later, Dan Quinn is in, and most of what Ron Rivera had here is out. 33 players drafted during the 4 years of Ron Rivera, mostly high picks, too, since they had only one season that was a non-losing season, and only 12 remain. 12 of the 33 players that he drafted. That's terrible. And from last year's draft, 7 players taken, 2 left. And one, Emmanuel Forbes, we're not even sure whether he could play. Quan Martin looks like fine. He's going to be okay as a safety. But that just tells you how things have been run, and we'll see what happens going forward. But this was a complete overhaul. This was more than what Dan Quinn said as a recalibration. This was a complete teardown, and once the season starts, we'll start to get an idea of how good this roster can conceivably be. Of course, a lot of it rides on Jaden Daniels, and all the reviews have been positive so far, but the real stuff starts to happen on September the 8th, and we'll see how they look then. All right, so from last night, the Nationals are playing the Yankees, and it's kind of like a double bonus night for the Orioles. The Orioles are playing the Dodgers in L.A., so they kind of get to keep an eye on this before they take the field. And the Nationals win the game 4-2, but I think just as importantly, Dylan Cruz gets his first major league hit. He also got another hit and stole a base. And, a lot of these guys, remember Jackson Holliday called up by the Orioles earlier this year, disaster. They had to send him back down. Dylan Cruz looks like he's going to stay and is going to fit in with this very nice little trio that they have there with James Wood, who clearly looks like he's going to be a player, and C.J. Abrams, who's on his way to being an excellent player, an all-star. So Cruz looks like he can be the third of that trio, and those guys are under team control for a long, long time, and that's going to be key. This was Cruz after the game with Dan Kolko of Masson.
Dylan Cruz, big night for him. His first career major league hit, stolen base, run scored, and first win as a big leaguer as well. Dylan, take me through the emotions that you felt over the last 2 nights. You got more than 30,000 people here each night. You're playing the Yankees on the other side. How do you process all this?
I just take it one pitch at a time, man. I love being here. This is a dream come true to be here. I dreamed about this when I was a kid, and you couldn't wrote it up any better. This is awesome.
And you'd been waiting 22 years for your first major league hit. You come up against Garrett Cole, a Cy Young Award winner in the second inning. You get a 2-0 count, and you drill one out to left. Describe for me the emotions that you feel when you check into second base with your first major league knock.
Man, it's just, like I said, it's a dream come true. Obviously, they got a great pitching staff, a great team over there. So, like I said, you couldn't write it up any better. It's a dream come true.
How do you process the fact that you're playing on the same field with Aaron Judge and Juan Soto? You're facing the team with the best record in the American League, and that, you've made it here.
It feels great. It's like you dream of these moments, and you got 2 MVP front runners over there. So, it's just you look up to these guys. You watch them all on TV as you grow up, and now you're playing against them. So, this is awesome.
And you've had such great family and friends support here the last couple of days as well. So many people here. Were you able to lock eyes with anyone in the stands after that first major league hit?
No, but I think after the game we're going to go celebrate a little bit, so it's going to be fun.
Yeah, that was last night, and Cruz with 2 hits on the night. The first one off the reigning Cy Young Award winner, who was also the losing pitcher when the Nationals beat Houston to win the World Series 5 years ago. So that's a really cool thing. And hopefully he keeps this up, and we got a trio that they can count on. Now, we talked about this yesterday, and you may have read it in the Post. Barry Zreluga making the case as they build this team with young and inexpensive players. Cruz was the number 2 pick of the draft, so he's making he got the nice bonus and everything. But these guys are going to be under team control for a long time, and well under the big dollars that free agents get, and coming off the books is some salary for next year. So that's going to be big. But the point he makes is, okay, let's see them pull the trigger and bring Juan Soto back. Soto was seen talking to Mark Lerner, the owner of the team, before the game. They seem to embrace. They seem to have a good relationship. Soto got a standing ovation when he came to the plate on Monday night, and there were fans, saying, come back, come back, come back. And I think that would be a wonderful thing. The problem is it's going to cost between probably $500 and $600 million for that to happen. But according to what Barry writes, this is the cost of doing business. And he looked at the Jason Worth signing. It was obviously a lot less in those days, $126 million. But that was under the same idea that you get young players and then you bond them with a superstar player. Soto is going to go to the Hall of Fame. Worth is not, but the same idea is in place there. It makes for interesting conversation. Tony and Mike took it on last night on PTI. Tony, a big Nats fan. This is what they said about the idea that Barry puts forth about Soto returning.
Juan Soto is about to be a free agent. He will likely sign the richest contract in the history of baseball. Could you see him signing it with the Nats?
Tony, not really. I mean, not if the Yankees want him. And with the way he's playing, the season he's having, the Yankees had better want him. And we'll find out more about that as we get to September and through October. But Tone, I get it. I understand everybody in metropolitan Washington must have loved the reaction of Washington, D.C. last night.
Yeah.
And they must love the quotes they hear coming from Soto, because he won something called the World Series, which, by the way, Bryce Harper did not win with Washington.
Did not.
And it's a great
That's
thing.
right.
It's really cool that he would have those fond feelings. And we've seen that before from players who've gone away, whether they left on their own or were traded. But Tony, here's the thing. The Nationals aren't the Yankees when it comes to spending money. They have the money. I mean, their ownership group has enough money to do this. They let everybody walk once from a World Series team that I just talked about, even though those players, many of them, most of them had not yet entered their primes, including Juan Soto. So no, if the Yankees want Soto or the Dodgers want Soto, he's going to wind up going to one of those two, probably staying with the Yankees and not coming back. Sorry to burst your bubble.
Yeah, so this is the subject of our friend Barry Zerluga's column today in the Washington Post. The possibility that Soto could come back. And Soto was greeted last night with a standing ovation. There were chants which would come home Soto. Look, as a Nats fan, I would love to see this happen. I'm not sure, as you're not sure, that it's practical. But the sort of starry notion that he would come back and then he would play with C.J. Abrams and James Wood, who were in the trade for him, they'd all play together, that's very appealing. But you're right about, you say the national ownership has a lot of money. They haven't spent it lately. Their payroll this year is 24th. And this is going to be $500 to $600 million. And that is more associated with the Yankees and more associated with the Mets than with the Nationals. Then there's the matter of the agent, Scott Boras, who may or may not be the devil. I don't know that Scott Boras is going to want to re-sign Soto with the Nats when he turned down their initial offer a few years ago of about $350 million, and that led to the trade with the Padres. And then the ownership is sort of in question. The Lerner family had the team on the market a year or so ago. They didn't get $2.4 million, so they pulled it back at this point, but they haven't spent anything since. So maybe a white knight rides in, right? And he spends $2.4 billion, and then you're asking him to spend another $600 million, and pretty soon you're talking about real money. So as much as I would like it, I'm not certain it would happen.
Either.
No, I'm not.
I thought you were going to be a little bit more bullish on this. I know how much you love Soto. I thought you were going to be like waving the flag on this one.
Well, if I had a flag, I'd wave it, but that doesn't mean it's actually going to happen. I'm trying to be practical here, you know.
No, it would be fun to see him locally again, Tone, but I don't think it's going to happen either.
Correction for Tony, it was $440 million, the offer, not $350 that they gave to Soto. And once Scott Boras turned that down, that's when they made the deal to shop him to San Diego. And yes, you get these two guys who are going to be hopefully key parts of your lineup. You still hope that Mackenzie Gore can become a really strong starter. He's had some flashes. So, that's kind of like a 4-player trade, 5-player trade if you are to bring him in. But the big thing is money. Tom Lavero weighs in on this in his column today in the Washington Times, and he looks at the big three with Wood, Abrams, and Cruz, and points out this. Yes, it's great to have these young players, and you got DJ Hurst and Mitchell Parker. Both have been called up from the minors this year because of injuries and have performed well. They also have a pitching prospect in the minors named Travis Sikora, who they have big hopes for. But as Lavero writes, they'll need more. You can't field a team of kids that cost you pennies. You'll need some veteran presence on the roster next year, and not just a Joey Gallo or whatever spare part can be picked up off the scrap heap for next season. Realize Gallo was their big free agent signing of the offseason. They gave him $5 million, and some of that is deferred money. Patrick Corbin's coming off the books, so that frees up some cash, but the kind of money that you're going to be talking about, between $500 and $600 million. More from Lavero. With an active payroll on the books for next season that is significantly less than $100 million, it shouldn't be too much for Mike Rizzo to find and add the experience pieces the teams need. Soto was traded to San Diego in 2022 after passing up $440 million from Washington. And he talks about the chants, come home Soto, the other night, the crowd of 38,000, many of them Yankee fans wearing, he says, Nationals Soto jerseys, but I think you also saw a number of people who are Yankee fans there. That's just the way it is. But as Lavero writes, he got a big standing ovation when he came to the plate, but here's the reality check. The team gave away 10,000 Dylan Cruz T-shirts on Monday night. Fans should get used to wearing those Cruz T-shirts and keep the Soto jerseys in the closet. There's a better chance of the Lerners changing the name of the Nationals to Redskins than them spending more than $500 million to bring back Soto. Also, with the Boras circumstance with Soto, Boras' relationship was with Ted Lerner. And in one case, it worked out spectacularly well for them. He was able to deliver Max Scherzer for $210 million with some of that money guaranteed. For Washington, that's the biggest free agent bargain in history. That more than anything was what delivered the World Series. Yes, we did have a World Series MVP not named Scherzer. Okay, Steven Strasburg was the MVP, but if you look at the team and how it was led and the emphasis that he gave to them as a guy who could go out there and deliver as he did in Game 7 of the World Series, injured, he was key in all of that. And Boras and Ted Lerner worked that out. That was done, I'm told, without the knowledge of Mike Rizzo. I don't think Mark Lerner has that kind of relationship with Boras. So I don't necessarily see them working something out, and I think Boras, having been turned down by Washington, he's going to play that relationship between the Mets and the Yankees for all he can. Steve Cohen is not going to be outbid, I don't think, for Juan Soto. So Soto topping $600 million, not that he won't be worth it, but I don't think he's going to get it from here. It's nice to talk about. It's nice to dream about, but I don't think that's going to happen. Coming up, Matthew Berry, Mr. Fantasy Football, now with NBC, with some interesting insight on how leagues work and also something called the Guillotine League, which you may or may not be familiar with. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Orioles preview 10:30. Tim Kirchin's on the show today from ESPN. He's also got a podcast with his son called Is This a Great Game or What?, which is also the title of a book that Tim wrote some years ago. We'll also talk to Matt Wayrich, from the Baltimore Sun as the team continues its series in Los Angeles tonight. So it is fantasy football time. If you haven't had your draft, you're certain to have it in the next, 10 days or so. The opener actually is a week from tomorrow night. So, yeah, certainly within the next 10 days. Matthew Berry, who is a Commanders fan. I've really never investigated how that was the case. Did he grow up around here? He worked for ESPN for a long time and now has gone to NBC, but he's an entrepreneur. He owns some form of fantasy football. Don't ask me what it's about, but that's part of what he does. And so he's really figured out how to own it and promote it because he's on Football Night in America every Sunday night, which is the most watched primetime night of the week. The Sunday night football game always finishes number one. So anyway, he was on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday, and as he's always asked, I'm sure this is the first question anybody asks him: who should you take number one?
Christian McCaffrey number one?
Yes.
Not even close.
I don't know that it's not even close. Obviously, there's he's got the soft tissue stuff that makes it a little concerned. But for me, no, just because not only is he great, but he is so much better than everyone else at the position. Over 100 points last year, better than everyone else. 12 games of Christian McCaffrey, and I'm not suggesting that he's not going to play every game, but even on a part-time basis, Christian McCaffrey just is such a huge value week in, week out at the position.
So there you go. Now, he also talked about Saquon Barkley. And while Barkley is a great fantasy player for the Giants, maybe not so much with the Eagles, because when the Eagles get down around the goal line, it's Jalen Hurts and the tush push. So his touchdown numbers may be down this year. His rushing numbers may be up with a better offensive line, with a better team around him. But that's something to be aware of, that because of the tush push and the lack of touchdowns, that might be a factor. We've also seen now with the various with the various gambling sites that they have now gotten into fantasy football, which kind of blurred the lines. Patrick asked Matthew Berry, what about the relationship now between legalized gambling and fantasy football?
I think they're still very separate. I think the positives of it for the fantasy sports industry is that now there's a lot more money and interest in fantasy sports because fantasy sports players are very likely going to become sports bettors when it's legal in their state, right? And or they are, they already are. But anyway, so there's been more resources, more money, more attention paid to fantasy. That's been very helpful, in terms of my career, right? I mean, I would like to think so, but I don't know. Like, part of the reason I think that I was able to, I'm at NBC, awesome, but I'm on Football Night in America, right? I'm on a pregame show I'm on the number one pregame show. And I think a big part of that is because I do segments for DraftKings, and so the influx of revenue and money and resources into fantasy from sports betting companies has been a real positive to the industry, I think, overall. In terms of the actual gameplay, there's definitely obviously some, there's definitely some sort of games that are kind of gambling, kind of fantasy, that are sort of gray. But ultimately, I think the value proposition for fantasy versus the value proposition for sports betting are different, right? Like with fantasy, it's like we were talking before the show about your son, right? It's like you get together with your buddies and you want to talk crap to each other all week long, and it's a much more social experience. Whereas with sports betting, you're like, I'm watching the Sunday Night Football game and I want a little action, right? We've got you may not be a fan of the Chiefs or the Ravens, but you're going to be watching Thursday night, and maybe you think like, I think Mahomes kills him. Give me the over on 1.5 passing touchdowns or whatever it is. And now you've got a rooting action in something that you might not have rooted for before.
All right. So my son, knowing that you were coming on, knowing I wasn't going to give him any advice, he wants an honest review.
Okay.
Of his fantasy team here.
All right. How many teams in the league?
I think 12.
12-team league. Okay.
Okay. So Breece Hall.
Great.
Saquon.
Yep. Sure. Saquon's awesome as a number 2 running back. Sure.
Brock Purdy.
Fine.
Mike Evans.
Okay.
Michael Pittman.
Okay.
George Kittle.
Great.
James Cook.
Love Cook.
Christian Kirk.
Great.
Miami Dolphins defense.
Okay. Fine.
Then some of the bench, Blake Corum.
Yep.
Zamir White, Calvin Ridley, Hollywood Brown, Dante Johnson, Jacoby Myers, Dallas Goedert.
So I think he's a little, after his 2 big running backs, he's a little light on running back. I wish he had one elite wide receiver. I will say that I think Deontay Johnson is a great pick, just of all the guys you ran through. Deontay Johnson's going to be the focal point of that Panthers offense. And I think that's really interesting. I think Calvin Ridley's pretty interesting too. I think the Titans are going to be a much, much more fun team this year than people expect them to be. They're going to be more pass happy under Brian Callahan. Will Levis is going to chuck it all over the place. Like I'm honestly, I'm looking forward to the Titans this year. I think they're going to be a lot of fun. The Evans is fine. Evans is solid. He's going to be another 1,000 yards. He always is. My only concern on Pittman is just, I assume it's PPR scoring. Okay, yeah. So Pittman's kind of a PPR cheat code, but he doesn't score touchdowns a lot, and so hard to see. We don't know yet with a full year of Anthony Richardson how much looks he's going to get. I would have liked a slightly better wide receiver room for your son, but overall, that's a pretty good team.
Guillotine leagues?
Yes.
How popular?
They are getting more and more popular. So guillotine leagues, have you ever played one, Dan?
No.
Are you familiar with this concept at all? Okay, so for people who've never played it, this I think it is the greatest thing in the world. Guillotine league's very simple. You get a league together, you draft a team like normal. Everyone drafts a team. The key here is that you don't play head to head. What you do is you just start your lineup like normal. At the end of the week, the team with the lowest score in the league gets cut, chopped forever. Your season's over. And you just keep doing that until one team remains. Here's the other twist that's completely just blows your mind. All the players on the team that get cut go back into the free agent pool.
Oh, wow.
So it's like week 6 and like Mahomes and McCaffrey are on the waiver wire. And so every week, every team has stars. And so every week there are stars on the waiver wire. I like this game so much, I bought the company. I literally own Guillotine Leagues. Fantasy Life, we bought guillotineleagues.com. And it's literally one of those, it's the old Victor Kayem. I liked it so much, I bought the company. And we've made the game free to play. And so I'm just out. I'm like in 11 different leagues of Guillotine Leagues, and the people that play it absolutely love it. Everyone that's ever tried it is just like, this is so addicting because it's one of those things. It's like you have a bad week in normal fantasy football, you're like, all right, whatever. But then what happens is you got a guy on a bye, somebody leaves the game early, another one of your stars has a bad game, and suddenly you're sitting there like, if Josh Jacobs doesn't score a touchdown on Monday night, I'm dead. Like, it is a sweat like you've never had, Dan. And so it's really fun. And the other cool thing is the last thing I'll just say is if you're like, I can't get a league together before the time the season starts, it doesn't matter. Because you're not playing head to head, you can start a league any week you want. Like, all you need is one more team in the league than weeks left in the season. So with 4 weeks of the season, you could start a 5-person league. Because again, it's just all about just don't be last.
That's fantasy guru Matthew Berry. That is a thought. Now, you probably would want to do that with just a few weeks left in the season, because if you're in a guillotine league and each week they cut the last team, you could be out in week 1. That's no fun. So, could you re-enter? I guess you could. I don't know. And your players get distributed to other teams. So, yeah, where are you going to get your players? So, yeah, it makes sense. It's like those picking things where you pick a winner, and if your team loses, then you're out for the week or out for the rest of the season. I don't know. I don't play these things, and here's the reason why. It's not that I don't enjoy football. I love football, but I don't want to be watching a game and necessarily be involved in the stats of a particular player. I just like to watch the game. But obviously, it's a huge factor in the popularity of football. It has certainly been a factor in how much money is coming in with the television networks, and now they're sending it out to the streaming services and so forth. So Matthew Berry and the people that do what he does have had an enormous impact on the NFL. And, I remember this back in the day when I was doing sports radio in New York and there was no internet. What we did was a wraparound show, kind of like what they do now with the Red Zone channel, but we would have a stringer in each of the stadiums. And so I did a bunch of these shows, and you would sit there and you'd throw from stadium to stadium, and he or she doing the update would tell you, what the score was, but also say so-and-so has got, 5 catches for 45 yards or whatever it is. And so the fantasy people could keep up with it that way. That was, I know it's hard to imagine a world without an internet, but that's the way it was back in the 80s. And it was a pretty cool thing. And here we are now in 2024, and this is what has evolved to something called the Guillotine League. More from football. Andrew Whitworth is part of the pre- and the post-game show now on Prime on Thursday nights. Played a long time in the NFL, like 18 years, finally won a Super Bowl in his last game with the Los Angeles Rams. And he's been touring the various training camps and was on yesterday on the Rich Eisen show. And they were talking about the C.D. Lamb contract extension, which was finally done the other day, which puts him at like $34 million. But the ongoing Dak Prescott drama, it never ends, and it fuels ESPN. ESPN is fueled by two things: LeBron James and the Dak Prescott contract. Seems like he just signed a contract, but I guess that's up, and there is a lot of speculation that he's just going to play it out and become an unrestricted free agent at the end of the year. But so far, he doesn't have one. Lamb is now taken care of. Does that mean they now turn their attention to Dak, and could they get it done before the opener in like 7 or 8 days? We'll see. But Whitworth, who's played with a variety of teams, understands the locker room dynamic. And while it seems like everything is going to be okay, especially with Lamb's deal done and Dak seemingly okay with going into the last year of his contract, he says, watch out. Watch out for that, and look out for how the players react to this as the season unfolds.
The same way we treat it, that's how your own team treats it. And they go, you know what, here we go again. Y'all are going to do this with another one of our guys. Or I'm in this situation. Y'all are going to do this to me. You start to create this underlying animosity to any time these situations come up. You're not going to just do the right thing and take care of the guy. You're going to make them go all the way down through the whole carousel of like, you're bad, you're being selfish, and we aren't ready to do this, and blah, blah, blah. And so now, 3 weeks from now, though, when they're playing the Giants in New York, it's going to have nothing to do with their football season.
But what about
it kind of does?
But what? That's the question. I don't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry, but
no, you're great.
All in. That's the concept. This is what stuff you'll be talking about it on your Week 3 pregame set. Whenever you in your postgame talk about the rest of the week, because again, I know you're required to do that because we were for all those years for Thursday Night Football. There's a full segment about what's coming up. Dallas will be on your plate 90% of the time about what's coming up. And the concept of the all-in, Mike McCarthy doesn't have a contract. It's possible Dak won't have a contract. Micah Parsons will be due something. Does that matter? Does it come home to roost in any way, shape, or form during the playing season? Does it put more of a lid on a boiling pot if they're 3-4? If they're
100%, the first big loss they have, it's going to be it will be navigation through that entire week. You will be in a very fragile phase of, hey, this guy doesn't have his contract, he doesn't have his. The team's a little agitated that they've got to deal with that, because here's the thing: we're only talking about the guys who are getting paid. The rest of the guys on the team feel that too, because they're going, hey, this is my guy, or I believe in this guy, or I see this guy do it the right way all the time. Look at Dak Prescott. Like, dude's a tremendous human being. How he goes to work, how he does everything. Every guy on that team's watching that and going, wait, why would they do that to that guy? Like, all he does is do it the right way. So if they do it to him, then for sure I have no chance. So you create this attitude where, one, guys pick a side. I either think that he's right, or that dude needs to just play football and shut up and stop worrying about his contract. And so you create that conversation with amongst your team. It's no different than any other company. Peers have a feeling or an opinion about it's, somebody else they work with situation at that company. We're human beings too. And so those guys start to create that. And so you can't say that you're not eroding the culture a little bit when you continue to go down these roads and make it nasty and make it a fight when you're doing something like this. It's just a fact. You create that animosity within your team.
So how far do they go in relation to who you think might go further, or not at all? Like that's my macro way of asking about the NFC.
I think the way it affects them is if they don't get off to the start and success doesn't happen early, you're going to see it really affect this football team. Multiple reasons. I think that, when you look at defensively, they bring in Mike Zimmer, who's a really intense, probably what you would consider nowadays a little bit more of or not little, definitely an old school coach in that mentality of how hard he's going to push guys and he's going to be tough on them and those kind of things. So that's not this lighthearted environment, right? And then, you look at the stress Mike McCarthy's under to produce wins in the playoffs and making some kind of run at a Super Bowl. They're under lots of pressure. And they don't have these contract situations figured out with, not like guys were guessing, do you want Micah Parsons on your team? Yes, you want Micah Parsons on your team. Do you want Dak Prescott? Yeah, you want Dak Prescott. But you want these guys in a situation where we've already taken care of them, and now we have money and opportunity to go get other guys. We're not hearing about them adding a bunch of great players. We're talking about whether or not they want to keep their three best. So it's like, what is the conversation about? And so I just think it's going to be a struggle for them, because also, let's talk about Tyron Smith's in New York. I think that they've got a chance of having, obviously interior, they have a really special line, but they're going to have a rookie playing left tackle in Guyton. And so he's going to make mistakes. So they're going to be a little off, and there's going to be a struggle, and there's going to be development time for him as well. So this team is, in my opinion, are they going to be good? They should be good offensively, but they're also fragile. One little thing, and they can start to go downhill fast.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story, and that's Andrew Whitworth, played a long time in the NFL and now part of the Prime football coverage for Thursday Night Football. A story told to me by George Stark, one of the Hogs, the head hog during the glory years of the Redskins. And he went back to the George Allen days. And George Allen, they had no salary cap then. He paid his players well. And they were veterans that other teams were happy to unload because they were making a lot of money. So I don't know what the payroll was, but the payroll was, if it wasn't the highest, it was among the highest in the league. And the Cowboys, they were notoriously cheap. They were great at drafting with Gil Brandt and Tom Landry, a Hall of Fame coach, and always had teams that were really good, but the players weren't necessarily thrilled with what they were making. And the Cowboys had an all-pro offensive tackle named Rayfield Wright, and they're playing the Redskins, and the Redskins had Dyron Talbert and Bill Brundage, two veterans making decent money for their time. And so they get down in their stance, getting ready for a snap. And Brundage says to Talbert, he says, hey Talby, how much money are you making? He says, I'm making, $75,000. He goes, that's really good. I'm making $63,000. And Wright, who's making under 50, gets out of his stance and starts yelling at Tom Landry on the sidelines that he's underpaid, that he needs more money. So the money thing, and I'm talking about realistic figures for those days as well. So now the money's getting into the millions and multiple millions and $100 million guarantees and everything like that. But it still has the same effect on players. It's not necessarily that they can't afford to pay their bills. It's the respect factor. And that's how respect is paid these days in sports. It's how much money you make. And if you're underpaid, you feel undervalued. And if the team doesn't want to give you a contract extension, what Whitworth is talking about there is going to trickle down to the rest of the team. And they say, well, if they're going to treat that guy that way, how are they going to treat me? And so, that's why good teams like the Ravens do this well. I think there are teams in the league that handle this. They went through a lot of drama with Lamar Jackson, but they got that done. So they handle these things well. And teams like the Cowboys, where Jerry Jones is just, as Whitworth said, maybe just doing a power thing there. That's the kind of things that can cause a situation to collapse. And what Whitworth is saying is if they get off to a good start and everything's rolling along hunky-dory, fine. If they start to lose in the early part of the season, watch out. The bottom could drop out there, especially if they don't have Dak Prescott signed to a long-term deal, because then he's a lame duck quarterback in what could be a very much of a lame duck season, and especially with Mike McCarthy, who's also going into the last year of his contract. So that would be nice. That would be nice to look for, a Cowboys collapse this year. Coming up, Jordan Palmer with some really interesting thoughts. He's a quarterback guru, teaches mostly college quarterbacks. He gives you a case scenario where Caleb Williams' ceiling could be higher than Patrick Mahomes. Sounds nuts? He lays it out. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630. It's your final roster for now. It's a fluid situation with the Commanders, and I'm keeping an eye on Twitter to see if they've claimed any other players that have been released by other teams. I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's a 24-hour period where you can claim players off of waivers and not have to pick up their salaries. I think that's the way that works. So they wait for that 24-hour period. But there's going to be changes. And have there been changes since what Ron Rivera left behind? Anybody not named McLaurin or Allen seems to have had his head on the chopping block. Just a complete roster overhaul. And most of Ron Rivera's picks are gone. 12 of the 33 are left on the roster. And we do have the 2 top picks from last year. But there were 7 picks. And in most cases, guys get a 2-year window to kind of prove themselves. And Adam Peters took a look at this roster and said, this is not going to work. And, it happens anytime somebody new comes in. You understand that. But I think what also is going to be interesting with this roster is to see how many of the players who have been released catch on with other teams. When Mike Shanahan came in here in 2010 after the 2-year Jim Zorn disaster where Vinny Serrato and Dan Snyder were making the decisions on players, they released like 25 of them, and I think all but like 1 or 2 of them never played a down in the NFL again. That tells you about the talent level, and we'll see. Some of these guys they released will catch on with other teams, but there are 2 undrafted free agents on this team, and there are only 2 draft picks from last year left as well. I mean, that tells. There's a player on this team by the name of Colson Yankoff. Do you know Colson Yankoff? No, of course you didn't. He was an undrafted free agent out of UCLA. He's one of those guys, went to multiple schools, played multiple positions, started out as a quarterback, eventually became a tight end, also played some running back. He's here for special teams. He will be a special teams ace, they hope. But, that's kind of the way thing. Tyler Owens, who's also a safety, he's here for special teams as well. And Dan Quinn talked about kind of the toughness that they bring and the kind of attitude. And I think he wants to establish that they have the hunger and what they had to go through to make an NFL roster, and they did that. Jordan Palmer, former draft pick of the Washington, well, they were then the Redskins. He came out of UTEP, 6th round, 2007, didn't really have much of a career. He played briefly with a couple of teams. He is the younger brother of Carson Palmer, who was once the number one pick, Heisman Trophy winner at USC. But Jordan Palmer is not at that level, but he has turned himself into a quarterback guru, and he works with college quarterbacks. And he had something incredible, I think, to say about Caleb Williams, which we'll get to. But when he talked to Dan Patrick yesterday, he was asked, what is the number one trait that you look for in a quarterback?
I've got some things that I think Caleb is way ahead of Pat on.
No, that's not the one.
It's confidence.
Stop that. Go to the next cut.
It's unwavering.
No, click on the next cut. Okay, the one where he says, what is the number one quarterback
It's confidence.
There it is.
And it's unwavering, self-generated confidence, a belief that is independent of the environment. It doesn't matter if everybody says you're a bum. It doesn't matter if everybody's waiting for you to fail. Their opinions are completely irrelevant. And so if you look at that list, there's some 6'5" guys, there's some really athletic guys, there's some 6'1" guys, there's some not that athletic guys. So it can't be physical traits, right? And it can't be where they're from. It can't be their ethnicity. There's too many examples across the board. So I would say it's unwavering, self-generated confidence.
Okay, but can you have too much confidence to your detriment?
I don't think so. I think people ask me, where's the line between confidence and cocky? And I actually think cockiness isn't past confidence. It's its own thing over here, and it's actually insecurity. And so when guys are overly, and I play with some diva wide receivers, and this is a common conversation within NFL quarterback circles, where the really, really cocky guys, it's actually rooted in insecurity. It's the opposite of confidence. Now people can mischaracterize confidence. So for example, if somebody thinks that Joe Burrow's cocky, then I think that's a misinterpretation of his confidence. And that's up to people's subjective opinions. But with the great quarterbacks, and I've been around some of the greats in other sports too, the Kelly Slaters and the Tony Hawks and some of the, even just other sports, some of the top golfers in the world. My findings are that confidence is usually the common denominator in the great ones there too.
Okay, but why can't I use that for wide receivers? Why are they insecure, whereas a quarterback isn't, if they're both sharing the same cocky trait?
Well, I think I don't know that I would put some of these diva wide receivers and some of these quarterbacks in the same category. I think what you do at wide receiver and other positions is based so much more off of your athleticism and your athletic ability, which is why wide receivers who are great have a shorter window. Typically, running backs have a shorter window. It's not just the wear and tear; it's the reliance on their physical traits. Whereas a quarterback can get older, those physical traits can diminish, and then they can offset those deficiencies with the capability. So a Drew Brees can age and get slower, but be more clutch and be a better leader and be more decisive in situations. So I think you can offset as the physical traits diminish over time. I think you can offset that with other capabilities. Whereas a wideout, if you get slower but smarter, I don't know that you can still play at the same level.
That's Jordan Palmer, quarterback guru, on the number one trait that they're looking for in quarterbacks. You got rookies, maybe 4 starting this year. Jaden Daniels for sure. And there's been yak about that, including what Tom Brady said about it. This is Palmer's take, talking to Dan Patrick, on how he feels about rookies starting as rookie quarterbacks in the opener.
Tom Brady came out recently and said, oh, my God, this is a tragedy that we're starting these rookie quarterbacks. I disagreed with Tom. I think that they're learning more. They're learning quicker. They're also older when they get to the NFL as well. Your thoughts, what Tom had to say, and is it a tragedy that we're dumbing things down so these quarterbacks can play?
Yeah, I don't see it as a tragedy at all. I agree with you. Look, the times have changed. I know you're close with my brother, and you guys are big fans of each other. And the guy was the number 1 pick in the draft and didn't play a snap his rookie year, and he was a healthy scratch because they basically wanted to redshirt him. And nowadays, if you don't start as a rookie after being drafted high, it's because of a very specific situation or because you're literally not ready. And teams aren't drafting guys that aren't ready. And so I look at it like this, that the position has evolved so much. And a lot of this goes back to like 7-on-7 when they're kids.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not the only person to be talking about this, but There's so many reps. They've thrown so many back shoulder fades by the time they step foot on college campus. And they've seen the same so many coverages so many times by the time they step foot on a college campus. And colleges are running more sophisticated offenses than they used to. Even though it looks like spread and they may look to the sideline and there's pictures and whatever, they're running sophisticated. They're asking a lot of the quarterback in college. And I was at a training camp. I was in practice the other day with a big time college program, sitting in the quarterback meetings, and I'm continually blown away by what college offensive coordinators are asking their quarterbacks to do. And so that just makes for a more seamless transition into the NFL. And I don't know if you saw this, but Joe Burrow had a quote. Somebody asked him years ago, and I've heard him say it in private conversations too. How much harder is the jump from the SEC to the NFL? What are all the things that are harder? And he's not trying to be cool. He's just, I think the guy's incapable of BSing. And so he just honestly is like, I don't think it's harder. Because on offense, we have more answers and we can be more in attack mode. We can have more adjustments and audibles and all these different things to attack those defenses. And so I just don't think the jump from college to pro is what it used to be, even though the NFL game continues to progress.
Yeah, and I think that Brady was a get off my lawn guy when he said, they've dumbed down the game so it's easier for these guys to get in. When Tom Brady went to Michigan, he had been a baseball player as well in high school, actually got drafted by the Expos. I don't think he was doing the 7-on-7 passing camps that they do now, and high school football was a lot different. They run these spread offenses in high school, so they make the transition to college, and then the college to the pros. That's more similar to college. So every step along the way, they're more advanced than it was when Tom Brady was coming out. And I think it's unfair to the quarterbacks of today to say that they have dumbed down the game. This was the most interesting thing that Jordan Palmer said. Palmer, a quarterback guru, briefly played in the NFL, younger brother of Carson Palmer. And it sounds insane to say this because we haven't seen Caleb Williams take an NFL snap in regular season yet. And Patrick Mahomes has 3 Super Bowl championships, and he's now in the discussion for the greatest of all time. But listen to the case that Jordan Palmer makes that the ceiling for Caleb Williams could actually be higher than Patrick Mahomes.
I've got some things that I think Caleb is way ahead of Pat on. And I don't even know that these are arguable. When Pat entered the NFL, he never played in a big game. Did you ever watch Texas Tech play?
I watched them play against Oklahoma State one time. And I was
waiting on a plane. Yeah, because in between, right? But you weren't like, hey, guys, listen up.
Got to tune in. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and they never played in the Big 12 championship. They never, because the defense was terrible and whatever all the reasons were for Texas Tech. So he never played on a massive stage. Caleb Williams has played on a lot, including his first game ever coming off the bench for Spencer Rattler in the Red River shootout that we all remember, of a historic comeback and all these unbelievable. So if I were to list going into the NFL, though, if I were to rank who's played in more big games, it's 0 to a ton, whatever that is. Okay. The second is Pat. I don't think, and I'm one of the few people that watched all of Patrick's games in college. I even went to a couple. And so when you talk about entering the league, who has played more big games? It's not even close. And then second is, who's handled like the pressures and all the stuff that comes with being a franchise quarterback. Well, Pat wasn't that until his second year in the league, which means he never really dealt with all that pressure and stuff really till his third year in the league. Caleb was the number 1 recruit in the country, and everybody was saying, including myself, this is the best high school kid I've ever seen. And if you remember when Trevor Lawrence was drafted, Adidas's campaign was number 1 since day one, and it was very fitting. It was a great line. It's the same thing for Caleb. He was the Elite 11 MVP. I met him as a sophomore in high school. I said, this is the best kid I've ever seen, right? So going through high school, then going into college as a true freshman, and then having that second half of his true freshman year that he had, then transferring, being the face of like the new thing called the portal. The portal Caleb didn't create the portal, but he was the first blockbuster move, right? And so he's the face of college football. Then he wins the Heisman. So then he's got the whole offseason this last year, and he's in L.A. Pat was in Lubbock. So it's like the exposure to what it takes to be a franchise quarterback, I would say also not even close. And then on the physical traits, I don't think it's arguable. I think Caleb is faster than Pat. I think he gets to full speed faster, and I think his full speed is faster. And so I'm not saying he's going to be better. I'm just saying there are a couple of traits here where I don't think you can argue Caleb is more set up for success entering the NFL than Pat was.
It's an interesting case. The only thing I would say in defense of Mahomes, not that he needs defense, but the ability to sit and watch Alex Smith quarterback a playoff team as a rookie probably was very helpful to him. And the system that they've got going in Green Bay, handoff from one Hall of Famer to the other, and maybe down the road Jordan Love gets to that level as well. That is helpful, and that's not going to happen with Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams was named the starting quarterback on the opening day of rookie minicamp, and yes, Palmer lays out the case well that rookies are more prepared to come in now, and it may be a little bit different even than it was when Mahomes came out 5-6 years ago. But still, to think that Caleb Williams could be better than Patrick Mahomes, and you could actually sit there and make a case for it, given that Williams hasn't taken a snap yet in a regular season game, crazy. But great to think about, and great sports radio fodder for sure. Some basketball stuff here, and I got Isaac Kuhn Harris here, college basketball player himself. And you're what? You're 26 years old? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm 26.
26. Okay, so who's the first real superstar that you can remember watching? Do you even remember Jordan as a Wizard? No?
A little bit, but the first real superstar was probably Kobe and LeBron.
Okay, Kobe would be, he started his career in 96, I think, and LeBron started in 2003. Anthony Edwards is younger than that. He's like 21, 22? Right?
22.
22. Okay, so he's 4 years younger than you are. He has said, this is great. He said, the guys then, they couldn't play except for Jordan. So this is a Wall Street Journal conversation. This is called red meat for Wilbot, who loves Anthony Edwards, but even he couldn't resist, taking his shots on this. So this was Tony and Mike with a conversation last night on PTI about the interview that Anthony Edwards gave to the Wall Street Journal.
In a recent interview with the Wall Street Journal, Edwards said, and I'm quoting here, "I didn't watch basketball back in the day, so I can't speak on it. They say it was tougher back then, but I don't think anybody had skill back then. Michael Jordan was the only one who really had skill, you know what I mean? So that's why when they saw Kobe, they were like, oh my God. But now everybody has skill," unquote. Wilbon, you hate when people ignore history, but you love the Ant-Man. What do you make of these comments?
Well, the comments are somewhere between naive and stupid. And if I was in a locker room and I saw the Ant-Man, because he is chatty and he's approachable and he's not a guy, this comment makes it sound like he knows everything. But if you said, Ant-Man, sit here and look at this video for a second of a guy named Irvin Johnson, and then watch a guy named Bird, and watch a guy named Isaiah Thomas, and watch Reggie Miller, and watch John Stockton and Karl Malone and David Robinson. Watch these people. Ant-Man would go, okay, never mind, I shouldn't have gone there. Because that's just sort of who he seems to be. Kevin Garnett, who is much more important than either one of us talking about this, said, wait a minute. And he started to describe the varied skills that all these people had, including skills they don't even have today, like post play, mid post or low post. And Kevin Garnett was like, stop, please stop now. And he pointed all these things out. So Ant-Man will have to get over it. And I expect sort of a take it back, walk it back situation any moment now.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be brief on this. He sounds like a fool. He does. Nobody had skill but Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, Bill Russell, Will Chamberlain, Pete Maravich, Isaiah Thomas. You're right. Please. He's got to look at these people because he is destroying NBA legends. All right, this is a guy, he's a talented player. He was on the Olympic team, though he didn't play as many minutes as 7 or 8 other people during the Olympics, but he is a talented player. He should have stopped, Mike, with this quote. I didn't watch it. I can't speak on it. That's where he should have stopped. Now go watch, because you are taking generations of NBA stars and putting them in a trash heap. So stop it.
But let me go further, and let me be old man get off my lawn now. And I know you will join me in this. Nobody watches anymore, okay? The people at networks don't watch because they're quick to say, well, it happened before I was born. All they have is video in their damn hands 24/7, and apparently they can't fix their eyes on it to watch what people did. They watch clips. They don't watch games. They don't know jack. It's not just the players. It's the culture we live in now. That's why we are old and say, get off my lawn. That's what we're stuck with. And Ant-Man reflects it. Oh, he does.
Okay,
This is that recency bias that you and I despise. This is the lack of interest in looking at history. Most of us got jobs by studying what happened in our industry before we got there. But apparently in sports, if you're a great athlete, you don't feel you have to do that. But it would behoove the Ant-Man to do it.
Yeah. Okay. So let me two things here. First of all, Isaac, you don't really feel the way that Ant-Man does, right? I mean,
no, not at all.
And when you watch these highlights, two things. It doesn't have the video quality that they have today because no HD in those days. The other thing I would say, somewhat in defense of what the Ant-Man says, is that there are more great players now overall in the league. There's still players then, I think, who could play now, but there weren't as many great players, partly because we didn't have the foreign players in, and now the foreign players dominate in many ways. And in the early days, like in the early 1960s, there were still some quotas. You could have African-American players on your team, but, the old story was, 2 on the road, 1 at home, or, something like that. And it was harder for players. Now, that wasn't going to keep Oscar Robertson and Wilt Chamberlain and some of the great players out of the league. So that was different. But I think the great players of the past, and certainly when you get into the 80s, when you're talking about Magic and Bird and Isaiah, guys like that, they could all play today. There's no question about that. But so I think he does need a little bit of an education. He's right that Jordan was great, and maybe I think Jordan's the best I've ever seen. But you can't just go spewing that stuff. It just makes you sound dumb. Last thing, and this is from The Shop, which LeBron owns. This is a podcast, right? The Shop, isn't it?
Yep,
okay.
It's a podcast.
Okay, so he did this when he was at the Olympics in Paris, and this is what he says about playing with his son, Bronny.
Have you thought through... Not relationship, because you'll always be his dad, he'll always be his son, but what's your working relationship? Is he going to call you dad at practice in the locker room?
No, we already laid that. No, he can't. We already laid that down. He cannot call me dad in the workplace. All right. Once we leave out of the private facility and the gates close, I could be dad again. In the car, if we ride together. At home, I could be dad. No, he got to call me like 2-3 or Brian.
Okay.
Or... GOAT if he wants to. That's up to him. I mean, it's up to him. But it's easy for me. It's easy for me because I've been calling him Bronny for so long. Yeah. It's not like I've been calling, hey son. So it's easy for me. It's gonna be the adjustment for him. But we cannot be running down the court. And he'd be like, Dad, push the ball up. Dad, I'm open. Dad, come on. I'm like, no, you cannot do that.
Well, yeah, but everybody on the team, right, Isaac, knows that's LeBron's son. He doesn't have to say it. And so if Bronny's in the game, you want to get the ball to Bronny to make LeBron happy, don't you?
Yeah, I feel so.
Yeah.
And also it's also the best case scenario to win the game as well.
Yeah, but it's questionable whether Bronny's an NBA player or not, but he's going to be on the team because of LeBron. Now, how much he plays, a lot of that's going to be up to LeBron. I think he's going to have a big say in that. And he may even say, we kept him out on the court 10 minutes. We exposed him a little bit too much. You're going to play him a little less. So, you can call dad or whatever you want, but everybody knows that's LeBron's son, and that's why he's on the Lakers. So I don't know how much of a difference that would make. How would you feel if this wouldn't happen in college basketball, but if you were, let's say you're in a pickup game and you got, a great player on your team with the son also on the team. Isn't that a little bit awkward for you?
No, because I've played with guys that brought their son and played with them.
Yeah.
It's not too awkward. Sometimes they say, hey, Dad, please pass me the ball. Or like, Dad, you got to take my switch.
Yeah.
But for some reason, it just kind of seems natural. It's like, oh, that's just his teammate.
Yeah.
But we don't really think beyond that nuance.
I've heard Cal Ripken do a number of interviews about playing for his dad. I've never heard him say exactly what he called him. I guess you'd call him Skip. I don't know. I mean, that would be awkward. But That would be different than this because Cal was the best player or one of the best players on the Orioles. There's no question he should be in the lineup. The Bronny situation is totally different. And it's not like, oh, good, we got to draft Bronny. It's we're taking Bronny because we're going to make LeBron happy here. And there was even that story out there that they were telling other teams in the second round, don't take him or he's going to go play in Europe. Something that was not going to happen. But this could be a very awkward situation. Whether he calls him 23, whether he calls him GOAT, whatever he calls him, it could be a messy situation for the Lakers, don't you think?
Oh yeah, no, it could turn into a PR nightmare or a blessing, almost like Ken Griffey Jr. and Ken Griffey Sr. But who knows?
Yeah, but that was different too. Ken Griffey Sr. was an established player, not a Hall of Famer, but there was no question he was good enough to be in the lineup. And then his son was a superstar. This is a different dynamic, but that's an interesting comparison that you make there. Anyway, we got Orioles preview coming up. We'll talk to Matt Wayrich, who's with the Baltimore Sun. He's a beat writer for them. The Orioles picking up a big win last night in Los Angeles to pull within a game of the Yankees, who lost here to the Nationals. And Tim Kurkjian, the great Tim Kurkjian, Hall of Fame baseball reporter, will join us at 10:45. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.